Tonight's topic is Iraq. And so this is kind of a rough topic because it ends badly. I mean, I think probably that's not a spoiler alert kind of situation. And then me being who I am, I'm gonna run us back and then run us forward so that I make sure you have enough background. And what they decided to do, so the way you looked for oil back in the 1890s was you walked looking at the ground, and if you were lucky, you'd step in it, and you'd hear this little squish, and you'd look at the bottom of your shoe, and what you wanted to see was sort of a black substance, and then you celebrated. Think about how weird that is. That's how abundant oil was. You could just walk around hoping to step in it. So the British decided to do something really interesting. They decided to scour history books looking for historical references to oil. We would never do that because we're illiterate, but the British, they could read. Right? They were running the greatest empire on earth, and they knew about the ability to read, and so they went for it. And sure enough, they ran into text after text after text talking about ancient oil supplies. Because it turns out, really it's medieval oil supplies. It turns out that in the medieval period, the Arabs were actually going out and getting oil. In fact, it was the Arabs and the Romans who were getting oil. The Arabs had figured out two things to do with oil, and one was they would put them in a glass sphere and that with a little wick that would go into a hole, and then you'd light the wick, and then you'd throw it in combat, and it was sort of like a hand grenade with napalm in it. And they used it in warfare, and the soldiers that utilized this were naphthayin. They were sort of the first grenade throwers in combat. So the English decided they needed a base of operations in the area. Now they had already captured Bahrain, Qatar, the Trucial Coast, which today is called the United Arab Emirates. They called it the Trucial Coast as in truce, as in a deal to stop fighting. And the reason they called it that, and they also occupied Oman. The reason they had taken these chunks of land was the people that were living there were doing piracy in the Arabian Sea, and that piracy was interfering with British trade with their colony, India. And so what they did was they went and they occupied this chunk of the Arabian Peninsula. Another group of people in the area, though, wanted to break away from the Ottoman Empire in what is today Kuwait. And so what the British did was they said, we'll help you, we'll support you, we'll make this happen. And the Brits went in, they broke Kuwait out of the Ottoman Empire, and then they turned that now into their base of operations in the year 1900. At the end of the day, and it's oil rich, it is the Arab-speaking part of Iran that's the oil-rich part. So God really did put all the oil underneath the Arabs, even in the case of Iran. And the British go, they start working on, I think 1905 is when they found oil in Iran, and they immediately start working on this. In the meantime, the Ottoman Empire finds oil up in the north. In the Mosul, Kirkuk area, they find oil. So it was the Mosul province of the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottomans sign a deal with the Germans. The British go, okay, this is irritating, we wanted that oil, but it's okay, because if we ever go to war with the Germans, they're going to have to ship it out through the Tigris River, which will go right past Kuwait, so we can just basically maintain a military force in Kuwait with the express intent of sinking any ships going through the Persian Gulf. So this is a perfect arrangement, as far as the British were concerned. They've got their oil secured in Iran, they can interrupt German oil coming out of the Ottoman Empire. Anyway, so the British need to rethink how they're going to take out the Ottoman Empire after the Gallipoli disaster. They come up with, why don't we arm the Arabs who no longer want to be ruled by the Turks? Why don't we arm the Arabs? And they fund an uprising that gets turned into the movie Lawrence of Arabia. So just to give you a cultural reference there. The Arabs are wildly successful, way more successful than the British had hoped. In fact, so successful that the British actually ended up undermining their own position. The Arabs beat the British army to Jerusalem and take it, and then they beat the British army to Damascus and they take it too. And what the Arabs end up doing is they end up trying to create a kingdom that goes from Hejaz through Palestine, Syria, and into Iraq that's independent of the Ottoman Empire, but also, and this is the part the British don't like, independent of the British and French empires as well. Because the British and the French had sat down and drafted Sykes-Picot. And what Sykes-Picot was, it was an agreement to disassemble the Ottoman Empire in a very specific way. As a bonus, they were also going to take the Persian Empire, it wasn't an empire, the state of Persia that erroneously called itself an empire, and also split it as well. The British go to Faisal, and they go, hey, we hear you're unemployed. Would you like to basically become the king of this new kingdom we just created out of magic, out of thin air? We're going to call it Iraq. Now, one of the cool things about calling it Iraq is nobody knows where they got the name. There are two sort of dominant ideas, hypotheses about where the British got the name. One is it's Uruk, as in the ancient Mesopotamian city-state, and the British just misspelled it, and Uruk became U-R-U-K, became Iraq, maybe. The other one is, in ancient Arabic, it's no longer used, but Iraq means riverbank. And there are two rivers that flow through Iraq, and then there's Mesopotamia, so, which literally means between two rivers. So maybe that's the name. The name of the country is Riverbank. They took the Mosul province, which was largely Kurdish, the Baghdad province, which was largely Sunni, but Arab, and then they took the Basra province, which was largely Shia and Arab, and they just jammed them together and created Iraq. In any case, Iraq's sort of plugging along. It's part of the British Empire, it's a protectorate, it's a kingdom, it has a king, it'll have a Faisal II, who replaces Faisal I, and it'll even have a Faisal III, but that's where that ends. In 1958, Iraq has a revolution. They execute Faisal III, and they declare the creation of a republic. So for those of you who were at my Egypt lecture a week ago, basically in a nutshell what had happened was Egypt, or who weren't there, I'll tell you what happened in a nutshell. Egypt and Syria had unified in 1958. Iraq breaks away, gets rid of the royal family and is trying to break away from the British Empire in 1958. Lebanon is on the brink of a civil war in 1958. Iraq declares that it wants to reunify with Kuwait. The same year, the United States threatens to nuke Iraq to prevent Iraq from invading and annexing Kuwait. And the United States sends the Marines into Lebanon and shoots the place up to make peace, right? Because that's what we do. We're peacemakers through violence. And so one of the things that we realized was the weak point in the 1958 Iraqi revolution was the communists. The communists did not want Iraq to join the United Arab Republic. The Soviet Union was obviously funding the communists, so we decided we should do the same, and we began funding the communists. And it worked. We gave them just enough that they managed to get just enough power in parliament that they prevented Iraq from joining Egypt and Syria. And then Qasim is the guy who takes over in 58. The CIA goes in there and cleans it up by assassinating Qasim in 1963. That triggers 13 years of chaos in Iraq, where there's one coup after the other. And it finally settles in the mid-70s when a person on the CIA payroll, Saddam Hussein, who had actually been involved in a government in the 60s, but that got overthrown in a coup, basically gets involved in another government in the 70s. He's not the president initially, but it becomes pretty clear pretty early on that he is super powerful. He wields a lot of influence. The actual president is sick and dying, and Saddam Hussein is sort of in the back running the show. We decided that we should test Saddam Hussein out. That it wasn't just enough that he was on the CIA payroll. It wasn't just enough that we had worked with him in the past and we had established this nice relationship with him in the 60s. We wanted to really test him. And so what we did was we produced a list of several hundred Iraqis that we didn't like. They were mostly socialists. They were university professors, scientists, just people that in general you don't like, right? The riffraff of the world, the guys, the big thinkers. And so we produced the list and we handed it to Saddam Hussein with no instructions. We didn't say anything bad about the guys. We just went, well, I mean, we did. We said we don't like these people. They're in your country. So Saddam Hussein mass arrested the whole lot of them. He did a handful of kangaroo